Hi, everyone. We are going to take a look today at not a battle, but really a strategy or is a series of tactics that were used by the Union Army to try to subdue the Confederacy throughout the entire Civil War. And this really comes down to what happened after the First Bull Run and the Union realizing that this entire war was going to be much more serious than what they anticipated and that they're going to have to change course and come up with some other strategy to find a way to beat the South. Now, it starts out here with Winfield Scott, our gentleman there they called Old Fuss and Feathers, the guy on the left, our great war general from the War of 1812 as well as the Mexican War. At this time, he does have many issues, which you've learned about before. The guy's 75 years old. He is over 300 pounds. He's got gout. He's got vertigo. He can't be on a battlefield. But yet he devises this plan, this Anaconda plan, to try to put a stranglehold on Southern trade. And it's something that affects the entire Civil War, even after he retires from the military in November of 1861, the first year of the Civil War. Now, our objective here is to determine the methods used by the Union to starve out the Confederacy over time and bring about their demise in the Civil War. I want to get back to the top here and actually say this. Every battle you see, especially with everything that Ulysses S. Grant does throughout the war, follows this path. The Union tries to starve out the South. That's the entire goal here. And most of the battles you see follow this entire purpose. Destroy the South's ability to trade, destroy the South's ability to get guns and get materials so they cannot fight. And the idea here comes down to this. I want to come back to those slides here in a second. But the idea here is, how do you fight a war if you can't make guns or cannons? The North had a ton of factories. They were the huge factory portion of the United States of America as it was, but they had 101,000 factories where the Confederacy only had 21,000 factories. The South was extremely weak in industry, and the North absolutely knew that. So if the South could not get guns, how can they possibly fight? So that's the concept here about why Winfield Scott dreams up this idea of a blockade on the southern ports to make sure the South cannot trade. Now, I want to get to one other thing here today, too. In each one of these battles that we are going to discuss, I also want to have a different component that we're going to add to each one of these discussions, and that is a bit of a game. And I want you to step into the shoes of one of our military leaders of this time, and you're going to make some decisions as to what you think our country should do. So let's kick it in here to round one of our overall battles game. We are going to begin this little game today, just reading from the slide here. In this game, you get to step into the shoes of Abraham Lincoln or the Union commander George McClellan. Can you make the right decisions that will save the country? We will start each battle lesson with a decision such as this, and here it is, the blockade. Early on in the Civil War, Winfield Scott ordered a naval blockade of the southern coastline. Maintained throughout the war, the blockade stifled the amount of goods the South could import and export. Though many southern blockade runners experienced success in avoiding the northern ships, the blockade gained success over time. By the end of the war, cotton exports dwindled to 2% of their pre-war volume. So 2% of what they were sending out before the war began. The South could not trade as they once had. So you are Union Commander George McClellan, or maybe you're Winfield Scott. I don't care who you want to take the shoes off here, but what should the North do to effectively blockade southern ports? Select one of the three options. Option A, do not even waste the government's money building new ships. Use your current fleet of 212 ships to blockade the most significant ports of New Orleans, Charleston, and Norfolk. Put your money in towards outfitting your military, not your Navy. So that's option A. Option B, do not blockade the South. Don't bother. Instead, try to make sure the South can't trade by sending foreign diplomats to Great Britain and France to strengthen the ties to support these countries in expectation they would stop trading with and stop supporting the South. Option C, immediately begin construction of as many ships as northern shipbuilders are capable of building while sending what we do have to the South now to intercept southern trading ships. So build it up as best you can. Try to make as many ships as you can. So make a decision here what you're going to do. If you need to pause me right now, put me on pause and make a decision A, B, or C. Okay. Once you have your decision as to what you would do, if you're leading our country to effectively prosecute this war and win this war, we're going to see where your points lie and if you made a good decision. So, if you chose A, do not waste the money building ships, just use the 212 ships and hit the most significant ports. If you selected this, it's a poor choice. You're allowing the South to strengthen. You're going to earn 0 points because you're not going to have an effective blockade whatsoever. They're going to get other ports, they're going to open up new ports, and they're going to find a way to trade, even if you control New Orleans, Charleston, and Norfolk. Good luck with that. You're not going to have any effective blockade. Option B, if you chose to not even blockade the South, but instead try to strengthen ties with Great Britain and France, that's not too shabby a plan. Give yourself 1 point in this. At least you might convince those countries to not ally with the South, to stop trading as much with the South, so you can build up yourself and your relations to stop the relations they'd have with the Confederacy. Now, if you selected option C, that's the one that's money right here. That's the ticket. You earn 2 points on this one, so you're the winner of this round. You're going to try to build as many ships as possible, and that's exactly what Abraham Lincoln, George McClellan, Winfield Scott, that's what they're going to do. If they're going to be able to try to end this war and put the South to rest, they're going to have ships. They're going to have to cut off their trade. They're going to have to do everything possible to try to win this war. So that's exactly what they're going to do. And I'll kick it to the end of this presentation. This is what's going to have a huge effect upon the South. By the end of the war, they are hardly going to have any materials left to fight with, whether it happens to be bullets or whatever. And they always had a tough time getting shoes and uniforms. But never mind the food aspect. They just don't have enough materials because their trade has been diminished so much that they cannot afford to buy anything, and they're not really getting any goods in. And so this blockade does have a pretty serious effect upon the South, especially once you get 2, 3, 4 years in. At first, not so much, but let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at how it went down. So after Bull Run, the Union is devastated. They need to find a way to shift gears and find a way to get this war back on course and eventually subdue the South. So Winfield Scott develops this idea of this way to blockade southern ports and eliminate their ability to trade, to starve them out. They call it the Anaconda Plan, naming it after the anaconda snake that strangles and cuts off the air to its enemy, its prey. And so what they're trying to do here, what the North is trying to do, is cut off the air, strangle the South, make sure they cannot trade, make sure they can't get any goods, therefore eliminating their ability to fight. The only problem is it's going to take a long time. This entire plan, and the North didn't think that this war was going to take long. People in the North thought this thing was going to be like a 3-month affair, but instead it's going to end up being a 4.5-year affair. So people really didn't believe it was going to be much. This is going to take a while because the southern coastline is over 3,000 miles long, and the Union only has 212 warships at start, so they can't cover it all. And at first, there's only a 10% chance that a ship's going to get caught. There's so few ships that the North has that the southern blockade runners, these European traders, are able to just get in like crazy and trade almost as much as they want to. And so it is not even close to effective at the beginning. And the European traders that would send ships into the southern coastline, they'd have their tricks. They do some things to make sure they wouldn't get caught, such as they'd only travel into the coastline on moonless, foggy nights, so real dark nights. They paint their ships gray to blend in with the darkness of night. They burn smokeless anthracite to prevent the smoke trails from tipping off their presence in the water. They would also build new harbors, new places to port. Now, my personal favorite is this. They realized that the Union blockading ships had a little bit of a trick to try to find a way to send all the ships to one area where they realized that one of these southern trading ships was located at. And that was when one ship saw one of these trading ships trying to break through the blockade, they'd send a flare up into the sky, and then all the ships would converge upon that area where the flare was. So the European trading ships would send their own flare into the sky. They'd send it to the right, and then they'd go left. They'd get tricky and did a little juke and jive move where they make everybody from the blockading ships think they're going one way and think the ship is over there, and then they swoop in the opposite way, and they just make a nice easy pass into the harbor and get to trade as they want. So the European traders, they figured out different ways to make sure they could break through and make sure the Union blockade wasn't going to stop them. And on top of things, these traders from Europe, they realized This operation was money, money, money. The captains would get $5,000 in gold for a successful round trip, and this whole thing might take them a month, might take them 2 months, but they're going to get $5,000 in gold for it. Regular sailors, they're going to get about $250 in that trip. And you compare that, let's say they work for 2 months of the year, 3 months of the year, they're going to make as much money in that amount of time on one of those ships that a northern factory worker makes in an entire year, in 12 full months. And so being on one of these ships was very, very prosperous. There's a lot of money involved. And so these people are going to be willing to continue these trips to the South, continue trading with the Confederacy. And on top of things, even though Lincoln talked about using capital punishment for the sailors that he thought were treasonous to the United States of America, the only thing they'd really do is they'd take the ship and they would take the contents of it. And so nothing big. Nobody actually got put in jail. Nobody was killed for being one of the sailors on one of the ships. And so we treated them in a very lenient manner. So again, there's a lot of money involved here, and there's hardly any punishment. Like, they might take the ship and the stuff on the ship, but that's about it. So if you're a sailor, like, you're going to be willing to take this trip. Now, over time, the blockade became more effective, especially when the Union started to build more and more and more ships and have a large navy. But in 1864, they were only stopping still 33% of all the ships that were trying to make the voyage towards the Confederacy. Once you get to the last year of the war, 1865, finally it's now 50-50. The blockade is pretty effective and is stopping half of the ships that are trying to make the journey into the southern coastline. Now, here is one thing that makes the blockade very, very significant. As it says here, trading materials and guns were at a very high price, an extremely high price, once the blockade became more effective. Some of these materials going up tenfold in price. The South stopped having so many goods. A lot of different European companies refused to send a ship for the fear that it might get intercepted and taken, and all their stuff, all their money, all their goods taken with it. And so there's a ton less trade happening in the Confederacy towards the end of the war, and all these materials were significantly, significantly higher in price, many of these being tenfold higher in price. So multiply by 10 and you get the overall price of it. So people couldn't afford living in the South anymore. The military of the South couldn't afford bullets, couldn't afford iron, couldn't afford guns and cannon. And so they become extremely weak. And even though it doesn't look like percentage-wise that the Union Navy is stopping that many ships, it's doing damage because the South just can't get any goods anymore. Now, the legacy of it. Despite the fact that Winfield Scott retired in 1861 in November, the Union uses this plan the entire war. And again, once we look at some of the stuff that Ulysses S. Grant did throughout the war, he's using this plan, he's employing this plan almost throughout the entire thing. And so even though this guy retires, Winfield Scott, and even though he really didn't do all that much else outside of this in the Civil War, he did give them a plan which the Union employed and successfully employed throughout the entire Civil War and starved out the South. Now, one little picture here, Confederacy. By the end of the war, hardly have any supplies. Many of the soldiers lacked shoes, uniforms, bullets. So the blockade, even though it wasn't perfect, it did hurt the Confederacy significantly. Now, you don't have an assessment today, but some of these items will show up on Thursday's assessment. So make sure you're ready for that and have a good one.